Yes. Oh,
Where's that box? The 130
oh,
or the
downstairs. Yeah,
136
I'll go
grain?
grab
It
it.
should
You
just
can.
be like,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna chat while you're doing that, so there's not so much dead time. So anyway, like a month ago or so, I came over and Frank's like, "Dude, have you seen this ammo?" I hadn't seen it, and he said, "Well, check it out." So, I mean, what are you doing showing a box of ammo, right? Like, "Oh, yeah, it looks pretty good, I guess." Um, 136 grain, 6.5 Creedmoor, and everything else seemed uneventful, but he goes, "Hey, check out these numbers. Good velocity, good SD." He had, several five-shot groups that were all pretty remarkable at 100. He trued it out to distance and performed as you would expect with the numbers that he saw from it. And it got us talking more and more about the trends that we've seen with factory ammo and expectations that people might have and what when you might want some kind of ammo that's factory versus other, and then at what point can hand loading possibly bridge a gap to better performance versus just wasting your time and stuff like that. Not that there's definitely like a real answer, so to speak, but having spent a couple of years shooting factory ammo exclusively, and Frank shot a lot of factory ammo and has been involved with ammo production and stuff that I think it's just a worthwhile conversation to talk about ammo and expectations and what you see, what you get, and how it has changed even over the last few years. So, yeah, that's why we're here.
Well, and what kind of brought this up is I'm shooting that TRG 22, and here's the TRG ammo. So Beretta Seiko sent this ammo with the rifle, and I was telling Chris how well it really paired, and I love the fact that in a 6.5 Creedmoor they are using a 136 CNR L, which is just an amazing bullet. If you look at the 136 CNR L, it is a 140 class bullet, BC wise, in a lighter package. So, what is that going to do? That is going to get you speed, right? That's going to get you. I don't know if that's going to go too dark. That's going to get you speed, and speed wins with this stuff. And that's kind of we're going to get into that down the road. But one of the things I killed the lights. Yeah, I wanted to see what it did. If it killed it too dark, nah, it's pretty good.
That makes up for it. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so I'm cruising yesterday or the day before, whenever we did this. What day did we do this? Like Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm cruising Facebook last week, and I'm looking at guys are getting ready for Cameo, they're getting ready for this and getting ready for that. So I happen to notice a precision rifle shooter, a competitor, and he was doing a 6.5 Creedmoor load, and I'm like, wait a minute, his numbers are 2690. I'm like, who in their right mind wants 2690? And I started talking to Chris, and I know Chris, like talking with some of these guys, like the Morgan Kings and that, they were like getting these really low numbers, like muzzle velocity wise, but then their SD is like twos to fives. So then my brain starts looking at this where I'm like, I look at factory ammo and I'm looking at the changes with Hornady and the jump from like an SD of 12 to 18 to now 28 to 35 that we have today. And so I'm confused. I'm like, oh, what do we do? And so then you start looking at reloading, and I'm like, well, reloading should get my SDs and my speed back. But then I noticed nobody's putting speed back. Speed. And I'm like, there's no speed. And so that's what was confusing me and why I jumped down with Chris. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I want to talk about this. Is an SD of 3 enough to overcome like these lower velocities where you're losing a little bit of predictability in the velocity? It's like, I don't know. And so that becomes our question of where are we with like factory ammo, the SD, the BC, and then the muzzle velocity? Like all three of these things, what are we playing on? Um, as far as that goes, like, are we seeing things that are allowing us to lose velocity but gain consistency, lose this but gain that, and it's kind of like it goes against where my mind wants to go, and that's why I kind of was like, is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome because we could argue about this with anybody forever because everybody has different opinions.
Yeah,
right?
especially with reloading, right?
Right.
So it's like to me, the sweet spot with a 6.5, a 6 mil, with any of these like faster cartridges, to me is 2800, 2850. I call it 2850, but that to me is where these bullets want to live.
Mhm.
Now we take a 308, a 308's happy at 2650. So my question becomes, am I thinking that 2800 is a good spot? I mean, like with the Valkyrie, and we can get into reloading the Valkyrie, I found 2900 was better than 2800. Measurably different.
Yeah.
So it's like, are we running into these speed bands, and are we allowed to overlook what the speed band tells us, or is the speed band telling us something different through ammo, through BC, and just in our shooting? Because it's like, if I looked at these numbers, other than the SD, they're terrible. To me, 2690 out of a 140 class 6.5 is way too slow.
Yeah. So what comes to mind, I'm going to draw a super fancy, highly scientific graph here. But when you've got a light bullet, right? And obviously I'm being massively generalizing here, so don't send lits at me, but I got a light bullet and I got a heavy bullet, right? The light bullet's going faster. You're going to put speed here. And when you shoot that light bullet faster, obviously it's going faster than the heavy bullet, which means that the time of flight between the muzzle and the target is lower. And the lower the time of flight that it takes to get here and there, the less exposure it has to gravity for the time, the less effects over time it has, the less effects over time it has with having the wind change the yawing of the bullet in, and how it has to, how it drifts in, in the wind. And so I think what comes to mind here is that there's a distance where those things are perfectly equivalent, right? But at first, that light bullet going faster, obviously, if they're the same speed, it's a different conversation. But if we have a light bullet going faster, its time of flight is lower. And often in these distances, it has an advantage. But there's a distance where there's an inflection point where that heavy bullet maintains its velocity better, right? It doesn't slow down as fast. And after which that heavy bullet could potentially outperform the light bullet because now it's maintained its velocity. Its time of flight is now shorter than the light bullet and or the exposure to the wind. And so those heavier bullets, and I think those are arguments that sometimes you hear with ELR shooters, but I think what's more interesting to me is when you hear a shooter or you hear somebody asking, should I shoot a light bullet fast or a heavy bullet slow? You need to know what distance they're going to spend their time shooting at and where their other skill sets are at, right? Because if we're shooting at 200 yards,
Right.
shoot, I want to shoot my carbine because it's fast, accurate, and
it doesn't really move,
It's
right?
all an ass, right?
Yeah.
Or a 17 HMR. I want to shoot something that's just friggin' smoking fast because bang, it's flat, fast, and it's going to hit the target.
Time of flight.
Exactly, time of flight. So those lighter, faster bullets, and traditionally, a lot of the competition zones are inside the average target distance is like 600-700 yards or 5 to 7. I don't know what it is, but let's say it's 600 yards. Inside of 600 yards, a lighter, faster bullet is going to have massive advantage because we don't have these crazy winds that are going to have such a crazy effect on these heavy bullets. But after that, oh man, those, like when we shot 223 at the Pawnee match, my 223, there's a stage with 1,000 and then it goes to 1,500 yards. The wind was nuts, right? But it's shooting a 73 grain bullet alongside people that are shooting 156 grain bullets. The wind hold was massively different for my little 223, but inside of 500 yards, that 223 could stand shoulder to shoulder with any of the rifles, considering that most of the targets were about 1.5 to 2 MOA. And the wind, it only varied 4 or 5 miles an hour. And it wasn't so crazy that light, small bullet couldn't outperform it. And I think that you still see that by taking these light, small things, like people putting the 22 caliber bullets in their Dashers or in their BRs or in the Valkyrie. You got these light bullets that are going smoking fast. They load them right up to that 3,200 foot per second speed limit. You got these, 90 grain 22 bullets
Mm-hmm.
hauling ass, right? And they could go faster, but there's a speed limit, so they put it right under that speed limit, and they're hauling ass, and they can compete at distance as well as these heavy bullets for these competitions. Let's say 1,000 yards. They're outperforming 6.5s ballistically at 1,000 yards, but inside of that, they have all the advantage. So if you're talking about a couple points, now that might not make the difference for the top 5 shooters because they're exceptional and highly skilled. But let's say you were always 40th place, but you were 40th place because because your win calls were not good. Well, all the inside 800-yard shots that you're taking, you've given yourself maybe a couple miles an hour of wind error, and you could still hit the target. So if you have good consistency, those light, fast, small bullets really pay dividends.
Yeah. And honestly, I've always found for me going that little lighter and faster have given me better results down the road. The other thing too is that you're trying to mitigate is recoil.
Mhm.
Right. So you're trying to manage recoil. If you're going for the heaviest bullet possible, you're going to have more recoil. It might be, smaller, or, the perception might not be as great, but it's still going to be there that you're going to get that lighter bullet happening. But I've seen guys like with the 6.5 Creeds shooting a 123 grain at like 2950. And there's really nothing that says you can't load that 123 in a 6.5 Creedmoor to a number. You know what I mean? But like that was where my question came up. We're having such a low number. It's like, is it worth to take a 123 and a 6.5 and make it 2750? Or is it better off to be at 28, 2950?
Mhm.
I personally feel there are milestone speeds,
Mhm.
and 2850 is one of them, or 2800, somewhere, however you want to do that. I noticed like going to the Valkyrie was loaded at 2750. It's a complete game changer with that cartridge at 2950. 2750 is a struggle. It's a struggle in wind. It's a struggle to see impacts. It's a struggle for a lot of what you're doing. You go to 2950, that struggle is gone. It's point hit, point hit, point hit. And there's no recoil, there's no movement. So I see those things happening, and I feel there needs to be kind of those locations for people to reference. So I'm going to shoot a match. Your 6 mil, your 6 Creedmoor should be going here. Your factory's going to go here. But we find if you load it here, you get all the results with these benefits. And that's kind of what I'm looking at, because like my question is, why would you load a 6.5 Creedmoor that slow? 2690.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, right?
Right. I don't know what the benefit is.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out, is what is the benefit of 2690 in a 140 grain class of bullet? That's slow to me.
It's been
And
happening.
so I want wind. I mean, because our wind is keyed off our BC. And if you're telling me they got the BC at 2,800 feet per second, and now you're running it at 2690, you're not getting that BC anymore. Now you got to custom curve your BC and ratchet it down a little bit, because BC and muzzle velocity are tied together. They're that the G7 argument is they don't separate as much, but they still are a factor of each other.
Yeah. I mean, when I've run that and fiddled with velocity in my hand loads, like I really do have to beat about 100 feet per second. You know, if we're making a load and it's like, okay, here's 2,700. Do I pick that one or the 2,740 or 2,750? I don't see any ballistically. I don't see a difference in that zone. It's like if I go from 2,700 to 2,840, I see a little advantage to that 2,840.
Yeah.
If there's no pressure, if the accuracy is good, if all the other things are taken care of, but you got to make big jumps in velocity. And so, but as you get slower, that falls off really quick. And I did a lot of testing with slower and slower and
I was
slower
gonna say
modes.
you had like 2,500 loads in 6 mils and shit
Yeah.
you were bringing to the range.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my question was, what were you seeing when you're at like 2,550 in the 6 mil? Because you
Yeah.
were playing around there with some like test barrel or whatever you were doing. I don't know.
Yeah, I was playing around with, well, how slow could you get it and maintain the same performance? And like a lot of things that are linear, you say, okay, well, this must be linear, but it's only linear kind of in a little bit of a window and beyond it and below it. But so there's a limit to how fast you can load it, or because of pressure and other issues. But there's less of an issue when you slow it down. And so I thought, well, shit, why not just load it really, really slow and see if that changes my hit percentage? And the problem is, as you go out to distance, that starts to have kind of increasing and exponential negative returns. And so what I saw was that, shooting a 6 mil, a 105 at 2,800, I had a certain performance level. And 28 to 27, I didn't notice a huge change in performance level. But as I decreased below 27, it was like 10%, 20%, 20%, 30% less. And
Mhm.
that happened closer and closer to the point where, like, after 400 yards, my cone of fire wasn't linear. It was like parabolic. And so my hit percentage just went through the floor as I got slower and slower and slower because it just wasn't behaving. And also it had the time of flight was decreased. I don't know, but I could track my hit percentage decrease as I dropped below that 2,700 foot per second. And it wasn't linear at that point. It, like, it just kind of slowly fell off a cliff. And I think that that's something that's easy to overlook. So like when you say, okay, well, my group is half an inch, so at 200 it's going to be an inch, right? And at 1,000 it should be 5 inches, and that's assuming, first of all, that you have a SD of 0, and it's assuming that you could actually perform that way consistently. So I kind of drew a little cone that increases that's linear, right? So if you have a 1 inch load at 100 yards, then that should be 3 inches at 300 yards and 10 inches at 1,000 yards. The problem is that's virtually impossible to produce and reproduce. And the thing is that let's just neglect the 100 yard stuff, because you can have terrible SDs. And in fact, I did this at a hunter a load 2 years ago. As I came up, I said, you know what? I bet I could have an SD of 30 and hit most of these targets, because I felt like they were about 2 MOA tall. So I was like, all right, cool. I made a load that had an SD of or an extreme spread of 100. Um, and it didn't really change my hit percentage that much. But the problem is, as we get smaller and smaller targets, that SD, I just drew it down just for the illustrative purposes here. But the idea that you have, if you have a 1 inch group at 100, that you have a 10 inch group at 1,000, you're forgetting that that vertical is going to increase as the deviation from 0. So let's say,
The
Frank
SD,
mentioned,
right?
like, well, why would you want an SD of 5 versus an SD? Somebody's like, well, 15 is fine for me, or 20 might be fine for me. You say,
Mhm.
well, SD of 20 at 1,000 yards, but we just get your ballistic calculator and change the velocity by whatever that SD of 20 is, 60, 70 feet per second, and see what the change in elevation is. And you can see that that change in elevation is now bracketing where that 10-inch group, you're adding a size to it. And so sometimes that gets bigger than the targets that you're shooting at. And that's just vertical. That's probably negligible in terms of wind, but it is elevation on a target. So let's say, like, a F class shooter, they're shooting at a very small circle. Well, they have the most vertical in the middle of that circle, right? 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. And so if their SD's bad, their wind call has to be flawless. And the better their SD gets, the more left and right they get with
Mhm.
wind. And to get an X ring, that's 5 inches at 1,000 yards. And so you have to have a pretty shit hot group and you have to have a remarkable wind call to keep it in that thing. But that's a very small target. And most of us aren't actually shooting at that. But the bigger your SD, the bigger the vertical gets as you go out, as the time of flight increases in vertical, not left or right wind. And so all you really have to do to say, is this acceptable, is consider the shape and the size of the zone that you're shooting. Let's say we're going to a 1 MOA competition, or we're going to a 2 MOA competition. What are the shape of the targets? If they're rectangles, well, you have plenty of left and right room as long as it's in that vertical. If they're diamonds or circles, you need to now try to optimize that vertical. But having an SD of 1, let's say at a hunter match, probably less important because the targets are 1 to 2 MOA tall. Having an SD of 1 at an F-class competition, probably super important, right? If you've got a good shooting group. And then at a PRS match, my personal criteria for that would probably be under 12, under 15, something like that. I would probably crunch the numbers to see how far I was shooting, but I can't shoot that good, and my groups aren't that good, so I just try to calculate all my abilities. But I think that's a good question with the SDs. Well, what are you shooting at? Because the SD might matter, but there's a maximum
Well, then that
threshold.
would also, though, like I was just getting ready to jump in, is now wind.
Mhm.
So your BC, if you lower your muzzle velocity, you're compromising the BC.
Mhm.
And so you're almost increasing your left-right SD
Mhm.
by going down in your muzzle velocity.
For sure.
Yeah. So you got your up, down, and now you got your left, right. So we're in both planes where we look at our elevation and our muzzle velocity and our SD, that gives us our elevation. But then we just kind of like, the wind is the wind is the wind, and the wind is doing that. But if your speed increases your BC a little bit, or keeps the BC where it wants to be, and you're not under that value, then you're going to be more consistent in your wind call. And that was one of the things with this ammo and with the TRG that I noticed, is that it was paired really, really well to the TRG. It had really tiny, nice round groups on the paper at 100 yards. And when I went out to distance, it was tight, So everything about the TRG paired with the TRG ammo tend to keep it consistent out further. Like one of the things I said to myself when looking at a review of a TRG 22 today in 6.5 Creedmoor was, if somebody went out and bought this rifle, and this rifle's expensive, they're still going to look like a rock star. You can pair this up. You can do this. Now, they might not be a comp person because the rifle's not perfectly set up for competition. But if they're going out plinking, if they're going out on the weekend like a golf game for themselves, they're going to be very impressive and be able to show their friends, I accomplished what I wanted to. And that was pairing this ammo together with that rifle.
And that's what most shooters
are
that's
doing.
the scenario.
That's the
Exactly.
goal, right?
Right.
That's kind of where we're doing with hand loads and everything. And to me, that appeared when I was looking on Facebook, bringing this full circle. When I looked on Facebook, I didn't see a full circle pairing of their ammo to that. And because I'm like, why would you put your muzzle velocity there? Was it a powder issue? Was it a barrel issue? What is the reasoning? And maybe they have a short barrel and they can't get that speed. I don't know. But that became my question. Why like this? And I think that tends to be the missing formula for people.
Mhm.
Like, why do guys, go back 10 years ago, before the comps were the way they are. Load development. Guys would never show up to a comp and they would be like on the forum and you'd say, hey, man, and they're posting itty bitty groups. Dude, you got the smallest group on the planet. Why aren't you competing? I'm still working on my load development.
Yeah.
And
I
that
shot
was
my barrel out.
Yeah. And that was the thing back then, is that they would do that. So it was like, well, what's the pairing? Why don't we have something for somebody that says, I'm doing a 20 4-inch barrel. My average velocity on a box factory is the 2750, which is what the box says, or however. And then, you go, well, with this gun, this paired this way, you should be doing, 2850 with this class of bullet, and your accuracy should look like this.
Mhm.
It seems like every time a person goes to reload, they have to start all over again, figuring out what they want. Like they know they want a tiny group, and they know they want an SD single digit in a lot of ways, but they really don't have a formula or a model to follow that should say, hey, you're shooting a 24-inch chrome molly barrel. We tend to see those are 50 feet per second slower than a rifle cut barrel. And so 2750 to 2850 with a 140 class of bullet is where you want to be.
Mhm.
And that's your spot. So you don't have a guy that shows up with a 2550 or a 2900 blowing primers.
Yeah. I mean, but that's like we just had a talk the other day about standards.
Yeah, standards.
This is exactly those standards,
Right.
right? If you can shoot, this MOA, are you better off worrying about the speed or this, like kind of making a decision tree. And those standards are, look, for these rifles, here's a performance zone that is,
Mhm.
you should understand the performance. And then you line up your performance with your expectations and you work rather than just
Trial and error.
fucking, yeah.
Yeah, what did Bob do? Bob's got a 28-inch barrel.
Yeah.
And he's hand loading with this, zippity doodah thing, and you're shooting factory Hornady.
Mhm.
You can't compare what Bob's doing to what you're doing.
Right.
So that to me is where that's coming across,
Yeah. This it reminded me, and I started folding this paper because I remember we were having a conversation once with Chris Roberts about angles and trajectory and essentially reducing the effective size of a target based on the angle of approach of rounds. But this made me think of reducing, even though it's probably not accurate, but it's a picture that could be. Anyway, this is what my mind went to, and whether it's actually real or not, or just well, fuck it. Right. So let's say let's say this is 2 MOA wide or 0.7 mils or something like that. If let's say you could shoot 1 inch, right? That's half of, I folded it in half. So if you're shooting alone, you could hit this target, right? But now you have a target that's this big. You might think, well, I could shoot 1 inch. Of course, I could always hit this. But the problem is that there's wind at distance. So now let's just say for illustrative purpose, we're shooting at the distance of the gun number. So if let's say we have this is a 600-yard target. It's 2 MOA. That means 1 mile an hour is going to be about a tenth. And I'm just going to divide this MOA into tenths so that we're going to pretend that instead of 0.36 mils, it's 0.3 just for illustrative purposes. If you can read the wind under 1 mile an hour, the target probably stays this big, right? But if you can read the wind to plus or minus 2 miles an hour, you've essentially made the effective target size that you're shooting at smaller. And if you can read the wind to 3 miles an hour, right, your budget now, you're basically reducing the effective target size that you're shooting at. Or I guess to say the other way.
Yeah, it's kind of opposite. The target's
Right.
getting a little bigger for you, but
Right.
you're missing smaller,
Yeah,
so it fits within the plate. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a perfect world, your 1 inch group could hit a 1 MOA target. Now, if you can read the wind only to plus or minus 1 mile an hour, but you don't know where it is in there, we need to add a tenth to guarantee that same performance. So now you can't always hit a 1 MOA target. So let's add a tenth to that 1 MOA target. So now you're shooting instead of 0.36, or we could say 0.4. Now you have to shoot at a 0.5 target. But you're not going to read the wind under 1 mile an hour. I don't care who you are or what anybody says. Now, plus or minus 2 miles an hour, I don't even think that's possible in a field setting or without having some other stuff. But even then, if you could read it within 2 miles an hour and you shoot 1 MOA, you can only always hit at this distance a 0.6 target, right? And then if you could read it within 3 miles an hour, you've essentially taken your 1 MOA shooting, but you can only guarantee that you're going to hit it if it's a 2 MOA target because of that skill set. So where's your wind reading? And so that 1 MOA tiny little group you're talking about, people are sharing their tiny, tiny little groups, but if they can only read the wind to 4 miles an hour,
Their group got bigger.
there's a probability that they'll take a perfect shot and miss it. Now, the majority of the shots are going to fall in this target, but there's a chance that they're going to be wrong or not wrong, but it'll still fall out of that 2 MOA target. So the better your skill sets across the board are, but what are those skills? Can you shoot, right? And is your ammo and are the numbers effective for your desired purpose?
Right. I mean, and that's kind of where we're going is we're trying to create these like a standards that Chris was talking about. We did in the other podcast. So we have a standard that we want you guys to be able to work through. And you should be able to walk up to a plate and say, I'm at 800. My standard should be this. I should be able to hit that plate. And then when you hit the smaller one, you know you're improving and getting, I hit him, I missed him, I hit him, I missed him, I hit him, I missed him. Right. Well, same thing here as you're developing your load, and we want to look at what is our bullet. That bullet should tell us something before I open the box, right? So I want to look at what's going on. I should know what this is happening. And this is a piece of my equation that I need to be familiar with. And beyond just opening that up, and I think that's some of the difference that people ooh and ah with when we're at a class or something, when I can go over and say, hey man, just give me that ammo right there for my gun. And I just grab something from somebody off a shelf and then I go and do a demo with it. It's like, I'm just going to grab something familiar and, box of Hornady, he's got 140s. I'm going to take those. I'm going to load them in my gun. I might not even be zeroed for them, but I know what the elevation's going to be and I'm going to be able to hit it. And that's kind of what we're looking at, is to give people without, 50 years of experience that I have, or it's not 50, it's 40 now, I guess, or 30 something, 38 years of experience that I have. And to be able for them to take away some of that mystery, right? So it's like, okay, well, what's the mystery of these different kinds of ammo? Well, if I grab this ammo, it's going to do one thing. If I grab this ammo, it's going to be another thing. And if I can get my ammo and hand load it or reload it down to this, I'm going to get another thing. So this is the worst case ammo I can find. This is going to be my better, more consistent ammo that I want. These are absolutely perfect, but I got to make them myself. That's kind of like where my head is going with some of this, and seeing the questions people have in class and seeing, all those different things that are mystifying someone before they came to me. Where are they before they showed up with me versus, without me?
Yeah. Some of the questions and some of the information is misleading because they say, well, this has a 0.3 G7 BC. Yeah, but this has a 0.32 G7. Well, maybe that matters, but maybe it doesn't. What's all the other?
But in G7, right? It kind of does. Those smaller changes in the number actually have a big impact in G7. So you would want to know that.
But if it's super slow,
right,
then it doesn't matter. So it's like, well, we need to figure out first, how well do you shoot, and then what's the velocity to pair into that SD? Because
I mean, if I got a box that the BC is 299.3 and I'm going 2,900, but then I have a box where it's 3.2 and I'm only going 2,750, I have to now balance those two and to figure out, is that enough to make up for the speed loss?
Yeah, I'm losing that inflection.
Yeah, I'm losing 150 feet per second.
And if you shoot 8 MOA to begin with, that's not our biggest priority.
Right. So where am I going with that? Yes.
Yeah. I think that's really fascinating. And then it comes up like the complete tangent here is that, let's say you've got loads. You're like, okay, I got my 123, I got my 136, and I got my super heavy. If you have a rifle like an AI, where you can consistently and repeaedly always take a barrel on, swap barrels, put it on, you know exactly where your zero is going to be. Like, you know, I mean, within a tenth, which
And
is
it does. It
perfectly
nudges, like mine
Yeah.
nudges a tenth to the right or
Right.
something usually. And
You could have a quiver.
hmm
You got your the barrel on your rifle, and you got two barrels, and you say, "What's this shot?" Oh, this barrel.
well, that's David
And
Tubb.
yeah,
David Tubb winning 11 times NRA World Champs in Camp Perry. He does show up to these competitions with two barrels, a left gain and a right gain. And he looks at the wind. Up, wind's coming from that direction. Give me the left gain barrel. Wind's coming from the other direction. Give me the right hang barrel. Because he's playing the wind with the barrels. Because the whole, like, spin drift, Coriolis, blah, blah, all that has a plus or minus with the direction of wind. So wind is either going to help you or hurt you. And if you can get it in the help me mode every time, because I'm going to change the barrel to the help me mode, that's that mechanical fix. That's why I was saying like left hand gain twist. The mechanical fix for spin drift and all these things would be, well, let's just turn our barrels the other way. For hey, you're a right-handed shooter, you're going to buy the left-hand barrel. You're a left-handed shooter, you're going to buy the right-handed barrel. Oh, you're going to do this and do that. You're going to buy these barrels based on your location, your left or right hand, and what you're doing. We don't do that.
right. But the good shooters, my guess is, as skill keeps continuing to grow amongst high-end shooters, they'll have to make choices like that to separate the difference between them. If matches don't change, you'll see performance continuing to go up. And if targets get a little bit smaller, distance or the competitive edge, that might be the case. But I don't know what rules are binding different.
Well, they haven't changed any rules. They need to get out and actually change a rule. They haven't changed anything since they started. Like I was talking to I text Chris today, and it's like skill stage. We should come up with a new set of skill stages. And like, this is even just using a barricade. Hey, you're going to do it this way and this way, and not kneeling, standing, kneeling, and it's like they're doing it. I mean, guys who work on this and they're doing a barricade in 30 seconds. It's a 90-second stage and guys are cleaning it in 30. That tells me it's time to change the stage. It's beyond. It's too long. It needs to change. There needs to be another variation of the skill, But I mean, technically we're across the course people. Should be, prone, sitting, kneeling, standing, and variations of those. Well, they rarely will do a sitting because it takes too long.
At the IPRF, the competition in France this summer, they did do a rifle craft stage.
Nice.
They called it "This is the Way," and they sent me the data, the breakdown of it. And I was surprised because they used a big target. They used 4 MOA target, and it wasn't just all 12s. It was hit or miss, but like, dude, that was a 4 MOA target, and there was, I mean, the best shooters got 12s.
Yeah.
But then it quickly fell off. And you thought, wow, this is the international precision rifle world
and they're not hitting a 4
as a standard of fundamental consistency. I like that. I mean, obviously I like the craft stuff, but I do agree, like you could come up with different standards and skills. Well, when we come up with our standards, we could come up with stages that could test those particular skill sets. And there are match directors I've heard are really good at being able to hash those skills out, but it's not universal, and it's often met with resistance if the shooters that are there as a majority don't practice those particular skills. It's not popular with 25-pound rifle people to want to be tested with offhand shooting, and it makes sense. A 25-pound rifle shouldn't probably be shot offhand.
Yeah, things have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah. So testing those skills, it makes sense, but there are other skills that as people get better and better, I mean, now the standards of precision, accuracy, and speed and PRS are really high. You could make new standards to say, look, what are we testing? Is it follow-ups? Is it data carry? Is it position changing? That 4 positions is not a standard anymore.
I mean, think about that too.
Positions
in almost a data carry way. You can do like a full size, a 66, a 45 down to a truing bar. You know what I mean? And see where somebody's data carries. Okay, here's a 2 MOA plate. Can you hit that? Yeah, my data is good enough. I can hit a 2 MOA plate. Okay, here's a 1 MOA plate. Can you hit that? Yes, I can. Here's a half MOA plate. Can you hit a half MOA plate? Yes, I can. Okay, here's a 2/10. Can you hit that? Or something. Well, that'd be half MOA, but 1/10. Can you hit a third of an inch? That kind of thing. Is your data strong enough elevation wise to get that third of an inch on a truing bar?
Yeah.
So that might be a way where you test somebody where not all the targets are vertical. Some of them are horizontal and the vertical is less. So we always tend to make targets where there's a little more vertical, unless they're square or round, right? A little more vertical than elevation or than windage. Well, what if you opposite? You had a lot of windage but no elevation to test someone's data.
Right. And you need repetition. Logistically, it's really hard. I was putting together a course of fire for the nutsack this year, which isn't going to happen just because of all this life stuff. But one of the things I was trying to logistically solve was, if there was a stage, I wanted people to take single shots separated throughout the day. For example, if let's say, I say, well, like at rifles only, Jacob gives you the opportunity to take one shot at a 1 MOA plate at 1,000 yards. And sometimes people hit it, but that's awesome. And statistically, people are going to hit it. But I want to know, let's do that 12 times. But I don't want you to just do 12 times right now because you know the win. So I want you to do stage 1 and walk back and do a series of single shot stages. And then go do stage 2 and come back and do that same series of single shot stages, because now
Mm-hmm.
45 an hour later, the conditions are different. And I want to see what that data is an hour later. And then after every stage, go back to the single ones. And so that when if you've done 12 stages, you've also done 12 repetitions of those one shot drills. And now we have data that supports your ability.
You know what'd be interesting in a match? You just made me think of this. So if you had a lane, could be as narrow as it needs to be, and you put like a 600, an 800, and 1,000 yard plate, and it's paper. Like, you know how we got those paper AR targets, like the bowling pins, and
Mhm.
yeah, so a scored basically paper target, a silhouette. And just when in between the stages, have everybody run through and put 3 rounds on each plate on paper and just go up and shoot it and to see what it looks like,
Mhm.
and just to see what the spread looks like on paper. So everybody can see what an entire match of everybody shooting the same target looks like, and put one, like maybe even just do 2, one close, do 3 rounds close and 3 rounds far, and watch, like, is everybody sinking into the middle? Is it tight and inside, or there's still some spreading around weird?
Mhm.
Like ASC used to have at the end of the first day the dirty group. So the very last stage before we went home, you had to shoot a 5-round group from your dirty rifle on a target with no aiming point. So they had a eggshell. It was it was an oval. It was like a 3-inch, 4-inch oval. That was like a craft thing that they glued. And you just had to put your group in the oval somewhere, but it didn't have an aiming point on it. Like, I use the mills on the edge of the egg. I just pick a mill, like 2 mil mark, put it on the right hand side, and just hold that and don't worry about the middle. That kind of stuff. But yeah, so they would test your equipment at the end of the event with a dirty group.
Mhm. That's
So
awesome.
so to me, it would be kind of neat to have something that didn't necessarily scored the individual, but scored the competition.
Mhm.
Like, how is everybody shooting at 300 yards on this IPSC paper? How's everybody shooting at 600 yards on this IPSC on paper? Are they all in there?
Mhm.
How's everybody shooting at 800 yards? Are they all in there?
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and just,
Just need a big piece of paper,
yeah,
like
exactly.
butcher block
Well,
paper
put
or
a
something.
butcher paper behind it and then put the IPSC in the middle. so the misses can still be seen. Basically, you would put a sheet of plywood up with white paper on it, and in the middle of it, staple an IPSC silhouette paper, and tell everybody you want them to put them in the IPSC, and then see how many missed out of 100 shooters, 3 rounds each.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of neat.
Yeah, we could do with the air rifles. We could do that, and they wouldn't have to spend some ammo. Just put paper at 300 yards, and if the
Yeah, but we
deflection's
waste
like
6 rounds all the time. That's
Oh,
like
sure,
bang.
sure.
That's like
Yeah.
bang. You know,
Yeah, you're
6
right.
rounds.
You're right. You're right. I think that would be interesting because you could actually extrapolate a lot of ideas anyway. For like, are people generally over underestimating the wind? You know, the pro
Yeah,
amateur
and
side
pro
or whatever.
amateur
But
side.
you know, is it a more is it a wider group than tall or taller than wide? And how does it what are the patterns that we see from close to far and try to make
I wonder if we can get like Paul up here to put it at Pawnee into like
That'd be
make
pretty
a
cool.
make a like just a stage at Pawnee, especially that one area where the 1400-yard shot is. Weird drop. That was weird. That was an odd kind of deal. Wow, I just like lost a signal right there. So that was a first loss. But now is it back? Nope. Yep, it's back. That was crazy. That was the first time we saw any kind of thing that looked like a drop. Unless me moving it did something. But who knows? You never know. You never know. See, in like this one, how we can see everything, and then that one's how it darkens it. See how the blacks are blacker? It adds a black to it. So I think we got this. We're an hour in. I think we got this pretty darn good, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I think we got the sound figured out.
Yeah, it's good to kind of. This was a fun one.
Yeah, that was good. I think we're good with this. I think the settings changed is pretty good. I'll listen to this, and this you should be able to use on your live now, but I'm going to edit that little piece because the first 7 minutes were shit. So I'm going to take 7 minutes out. So you just have to tell everybody, ignore the first minute or so, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's to address is the sound. That underwater crap. Yeah. So that's what we were doing there, Sean. Yeah, we wanted to fix. I was working on this sound because we were still having all this drama. I'm like, why is this not working the way it's supposed to be working? And why were we getting that underwater? And I think I had the board set up wrong. And who knows? It's just it seems like you can't kind of fly at the seat of your pants with it. You have to be a little bit more in tuned to all the settings and into what's going on there. But I'm digging it now. I'm liking it, and I think we're in a good spot that we can go from here, and now we can start launching these things and being ready to roll. So
get out to the range
and yeah, well, that'll be on the.
there.
Well, we won't have the board at the range, so we'll have a little bit easier time with it. But I'm going to do the laptop. That's the next test. Is the range? Is the I think
should we test it at like somewhere closer first? Like we could just do a remote test, like at Green Mill, or do we just fuck it, go out?
Just say fuck it and go.
Shoot.
Yeah, just
it's
fuck
more
it and
fun
go.
to do that.
And you know what? What I need to test is I'm going to get my iPad set up. I think if I set my iPad up and we run this through the iPad, because the iPad has Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi, but cellular, I think if I can do it through the iPad, boom, we are like in the butter zone. So
let's do it.
Yeah, man. Cool, guys. Hey, we're going to take off. Thanks everybody for popping in on there. Appreciate you. And we're gonna go from this, but these are gonna be archived and you'll be able to access them. So no worries on any of that. Cool, man. Excellent. Thanks, guys. And that, and that.